So for this video, we're going to talk about context. So having enough information displayed in your graphic to demonstrate enough information to understand what's going on versus minimizing unnecessary clutter in your graphic. So I'm going to start with a graphic that doesn't provide enough information, that doesn't have enough ink to show what's actually going on. And this really doesn't have enough data to show what's going on. So here it's traffic deaths after a law enforcement change in Connecticut. And on the left-hand side, what I'm going to say is an intentionally deceiving graphic. It is saying that in 1955, before there was an improvement in law enforcement, you had a higher death rate than after you had law enforcement step up its game. But this is not providing enough context. It's not providing enough years to see what the overall variation for Connecticut is, and it's not providing the context of other potentially comparable areas to see how are other states looking at it. So the right-hand graph provides more of that context. And here, instead of having the y-axis measured in the total number of deaths, we now have to weight it by population size, because comparing New York and Connecticut against each other for population would be a bad idea. So this is now traffic deaths per 1,000 people. And you've got the states that we're using for context in dashed lines to emphasize that they're just there for context. Then you have Connecticut in the solid line and the particular year that was highlighted in the left-hand deceptive graph bolded. And what you see here is that the dramatic decrease in deaths after the law enforcement changed, it does seem to be happening, but it's in the context of a lot of variation overall in the data. So you're not going to say that there is a radical decrease in the deaths after the enforcement's change once you see the other states having data that bounces around as well. So here it's really important to provide context for both years and also for other states. Here's a case in which you're not having any kind of intentional deception by not using enough ink, but instead you just end up being confusing. So both maps, top and bottom, show the same thing. The bottom one is actually redundant ink, kind of, except that it provides really valuable context. So both maps show water currents in the United States, or sorry, not the United States, in the world. The top graph shows the entire globe, but it only shows each area of the globe once. The bottom graph shows the entire globe plus another 3/4 of the globe to give context to that area. So the top graph is unintentionally confusing because you don't have enough context to interpret it. So even though this extra part is redundant, it's still extraordinarily useful for interpreting the data. And now, since we can see all of North America and all of South America, and then we can see Europe and Africa as one whole continent, it helps us understand what's going on with these water currents. Note that you don't see the Mediterranean in between Africa and Europe. So sometimes you need to use extra ink, but sometimes, usually, you really want to just get rid of ink when you don't need it. So to emphasize what the data says, use only ink that's necessary to describe and show the data. So on the left-hand side, you have a scatter plot, just like what you've seen before, but this time you have hash marks to try and let the user isolate the individual value of every point. But what happens is that the downside of showing the value of every point, if you wanted to, is that you obscure the actual pattern behind the data. Here you have too much ink. You should get rid of the ink so that you can show the things that are valuable, which is the relationship, not the things that are not valuable, which is the exact values of every single point in that scatter plot.